Welcome to Grappling with the Great, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and with me today is Melissa Hughes, who is founder and principal of the Andric Group, applying recent brain research to improve employee engagement, company culture, team dynamics, and innovation. She is a TEDx speaker, author, teacher, and neuroscience geek whose life is defined by learning, thinking, doing, and giving. She is a guest on the ethics panel as often as I can get her. But today, I've invited Melissa solo to share a story with us that I think we all urgently need to hear. Melissa, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It is always an honor to be on with you, Jonas.
Well, this goes back to at least my part in this goes back to a conference where we met for the first time in person, which I think was last March?
It was.
Back then,
Yeah.
in Florida. And you had a question for me. And I tried to give you my best answer, and that turned into quite the saga.
Saga is a good way to put it. Yeah. So when we met, which by the way was our first in-person meeting, and I ran up to you and I gave you a big hug.
Don't tell anybody.
I know, all that aside. So I apologized for that. You did not make me apologize. You got it. But yeah, I think right when we met, there was a situation in a school down here in Florida where a teacher was made kind of an offhand, I'm going to be charitable and say it was an offhand comment to a student who happened to be Jewish. It was during Holocaust Remembrance Week, or maybe it was the week after. And she was teaching the Holocaust, and they were actually reading the book Night by Elie Wiesel. And she told the kid, if you don't stop doing whatever you're doing, I'm going to send you back to Auschwitz. And when I heard this, I literally, I couldn't, my brain kind of froze. I can't believe that a teacher would say that. I can't believe that anybody would say that, but especially a teacher who's teaching the Holocaust,
Yeah, and I've told this over to a number of people, and they all react the same way. Someone said that?
Somebody said that?
A teacher said that? It's almost unbelievable.
It really is. And just a little bit of, my backstory. Christopher's family, all but, a handful of them perished in Auschwitz. They were Hungarian Jews. And if you know anything about the Holocaust, most of the Jews in Hungary were rounded up and sent to Auschwitz. The other significant piece of this is this happened right after Holocaust Remembrance Day. And Christopher and I had this big conversation about how would your folks have felt about Holocaust Remembrance Day? Because I'm always very curious as to, we're asking people to remember the worst possible thing anybody could live through, and they did. And many of the people that they knew did not. And so, we had this whole conversation about, I don't know how I would feel if I were a Holocaust survivor. And, I know everybody is remembering the victims, but it's also about education so that it never happens again, right? So, all of that was kind of swirling in my head. And when I learned of this teacher that made the comment, I was just outraged. And anyone who knows me knows that that's not always a very good thing. But I sat on it for a while, and I kept waiting to see, what is the school district going to do? Surely they're going to reprimand her. And I waited and nothing really happened And then I wrote an article. Because the other piece of this is kids did come forward to teachers, and they came forward to administrators, and I mean, even kids, high school kids knew that that is not okay. So I wrote an article, and I put my name on the article, and I sent the article to the superintendent's office, and then everything started from there. The part that I didn't see coming, and I think the part that I was reaching out to you for, was I'm not Jewish, and I'm trying to stand up for Jewish folks. And I'm trying to stand up for myself. Like, I don't want to live in a world where that's okay. Like, because today it's the Jew, today it's about Jews, and tomorrow it's about somebody else, and the next day it's about somebody else, and where does it stop? But the part that I didn't see coming was that there were Jewish people involved in this that were terrified of being associated with my article. They didn't disagree with my article. They weren't necessarily angry that I wrote the article. They just didn't want to be associated with the article because they're Jewish. And it put Jewish people in a light that they didn't ask to be put in. And you and I had this long conversation about, I think my question was, what is someone like me to do? I want to stand up and do the right thing. And when I try to stand up and do the right thing, in the process, I'm putting someone else at risk. And therein was my conundrum, which, I spent the better part of the summer trying to figure out intent and impact, and where those two constructs collide, because I didn't see the impact of my intent until it was out there. And at the same time, this was at a time when, it's worse now, but even then, back then, when this happened in the early part of the year, we were seeing anti-Semitism like never before. It was just, the numbers were so high. And so here we had a whole community of people who were already fearful. I was in this place where I wanted so much to help. Like, I want to shine a light on this bad thing that happened, and this comment that this teacher made that should never have been made. And in doing so, I shined a light on people who did not want to be in the spotlight.
Yeah, and that's as gray as it gets.
Yeah.
One of my heroes is Martin Niemöller, the German pastor who spoke out against the Nazis and was thrown into the concentration camps for his troubles. He was risking his own safety, and there's a cost for doing the right thing, and sometimes that cost is very high.
Mm-hmm.
But when that cost is going to be paid by someone else, then that creates a very complicated dynamic. I might be perfectly willing, and you certainly did pay a price in various ways, as you'll tell us, I hope, as we go on. But you're talking about a high school girl.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about families. My son, who has just come back from reserve duty in the IDF, at least for the moment, he has started wearing a Star of David, which he never used to. And he told me that he and his new wife were discussing whether to put a Support of Israel sticker on his truck. And he said, the truck's sitting out there where somebody can come and do something to it anonymously. He said, if somebody wants to come up to me and challenge me because I'm wearing a Star of David, bring it on. Special Forces knows Krav Maga, 6'2", he can handle himself, so he's not worried. But there's always this tension between making ourselves vulnerable, making others vulnerable. But if we don't, then are we not enabling and empowering and encouraging the very type of behavior that puts us all at danger?
Yeah, one of the things that I really wanted to communicate in that article was silence is complicity, period. If you if you see something that is wrong and you say nothing, the implication is you think it's okay. And in this case, it wasn't just that it was wrong for me because it happened in a school, and look, you don't have to teach the Jewish kids about being reverent to the Holocaust. It's the other kids, right? And in this case, I found the kids were doing the right thing and the grown-ups were not. The grown-ups were, oh, that's such a political hot button. Like, no, we're not going to touch that. If you don't stand up and say that's not okay, then you communicate that it is okay. And I'm not just blaming the school administrators. I mean, we each do that in our own lives. I mean, we all make a choice every day, whether to stand up and make waves about something. And believe me, there are lots of choices about what we can make waves or not about these days. It's not just anti-Semitism. But I mean, how many times do we go, oh, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. I'm just not going to get into it with that person. And when you say nothing, you're not saying nothing. You're saying, it's okay. What you're doing is fine. I agree with you even. Right?
And at the same time, it's not realistic to pick on every single issue. We just can't do it. We don't have the time. We don't have the mental energy. And so we're continuously processing, okay, how does this rate on the scale? But then when something really goes off the charts like this, as you say, well, what's next if we don't make the stand here?
And I think for me, as I was processing this, like, the teacher tried to play it off as I was just joking, or, I don't know exactly all the conversation, but, it was supposed to be dismissed as an offhand comment. But, if we can't stand up and say, it's not okay to tell a Jewish kid you're going to send him back to Auschwitz, joke or not, it's not okay to tell anyone you're going to send them back to Auschwitz, joking or not. If we can't stand up for something like that, like it's easy to stand up and talk about like those big, terrible things that are happening, right? And we can have an opinion about those things. But I think what's harder for people, and me included, I mean, this is kind of what I've been grappling with, is it's harder to stand up and say, no, it's not appropriate to joke about that. Like, that's not funny, that's hurtful. When people are just, because they like to dismiss it as, oh, I was just joking. Every joke turns into something else in the mind of someone who's looking for a reason to escalate that ideology to the next step. And there are people among us, I mean, we know this, we see them. There are people among us who are just looking for the next reason to escalate.
Yeah.
So
I remember when I was a kid, there was a whole series of books. There's the book of Polish jokes and the book of Italian jokes and the book of Jewish jokes. And I remember as a young person thinking, there's really nothing wrong with this. We don't take it seriously. It's all in good fun. And I think on some level it was, but there's a certain cultural discipline that these types of behaviors, even if we might posit that they're innocent, it's so easy for it to spread and to grow. And for the easy laugh we get from making fun of stereotypes, the danger is huge, even if it's not evident in the moment.
yeah, and I think even if you in the moment can't see that bigger thing, so it's a friend, you're having a conversation with a friend and the friend says something inappropriate about, Jewish people, and they're not an anti-Semite, they're just, maybe they didn't mean that the way it came out or whatever. Those are the times that it's really hard to say, you know what? It's not appropriate. Like, and those comments, I know you don't mean anything by them, but those comments fuel hate in other people. So I think that's the discipline that we all need to get better at, right? And how do you, like, I want to have in my back pocket, I want to have that, that subtle, tactful, that's not okay line,
Right. Right.
you know?
Yeah, I was in synagogue one Sabbath, and the rabbi was giving his sermon, and I went to him up to him privately afterwards. He's a young guy, half my age, comes from a very let's say sort of insular Orthodox community, and in the sermon he had used the word gypped. Now we all used to use that word without any awareness of its ethnic origins.
Yeah.
And I went up to him and I said, probably nobody here cared. Well, that's probably a word you want to take out of your vocabulary. And he was surprised. He never made that connection before, and he accepted it immediately. And he was appreciative for the opportunity to be informed that this really isn't something that a leader in particular of a community or really anyone should be saying. And if people are sincere, there was a case here in Missouri, I've mentioned this a number of times, a little town in Missouri, and at a community council meeting, the mayor was talking about contract and what they were paying, and he said we didn't want to Jew them down, and it made statewide news.
I remember that.
But I remember reading the story. He probably never met a Jew in his life. And he used that word the way would have used Jip.
Mm-hmm.
And it was brought to his attention, and he apologized, and he sounded very sincere. And I couldn't see any reason to not accept his apology. It wasn't a boilerplate. It wasn't, he's been doing this for years, and this is just, he was uninformed. And the willingness to be corrected has a lot to do with our willingness to correct.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think that there's a certain I think we have to this whole year was a learning experience for me because I realized how little I know about anti-Semitism. And I'm pretty informed. I think I'm pretty plugged in to stuff, and I'm a learner, and but I never actually had the impetus to really dig into the research that I did this year. And part of that was the learning for me. It was like, why did I never really dig into that? I mean, I know it's out there. And it's not that I don't care. I'm a caring person, right? And I think a lot of people have this inner dialogue, right? That you don't know until you know. And then the hope is that when you know better, you do better, right? But to your point about we have to be open to being corrected. And if I think we get to this place where everybody is so defensive, and I mean, I'll go back to the teacher story, and when someone said to the teacher, you really can't, you don't do that. Like, you understand you're teaching the Holocaust.
Yeah.
That's not a phrase that you can use. If the teacher were to say, oh my gosh, I didn't mean it to come out that way. I mean, I don't know how you would justify it, but if she were to say, I'm really sorry, and then go apologize to the kids, that's completely different. So to all the people out there who may think that, what a horrible person I am that got a teacher in trouble, like, that's not what I'm saying, because to your point about if I say something that's inappropriate and my friend Rabbi Yonason comes to me and says, you know, you really should rethink the way you presented that. And now I know why. My response to Rabbi Yonason should be, oh my gosh, thank you. Like, thank you. Because I don't want to be that inappropriate person. I don't want to be the person that's fueling anti-Semitism. You know, and anti-Semitism, like the hate, all of the, like that, the worst part of anti-Semitism is genocide. And, you know, genocide starts with comments. Like, you know, it's comments to harassment, to threats, to hate crimes, to, you know, we saw it happen.
Well, yeah, and the irony, certainly in my mind, is in a culture that has become so hypersensitive about using the right pronoun and not wearing a hat from somebody else's culture, and you know these I mean, the whole term microaggression. You know, there was a time we just called it bad manners,
Mhm.
but now it's sort of institutionalized. And some people are just clumsy. Some people are just a little less sensitive. Some people are uninformed. And and yet when something of a scale that we're talking about, I mean, telling a teacher telling a child to go back to Auschwitz after teaching the Holocaust, it's absolutely surreal. And you know, a couple of episodes ago, we talked about these college presidents that could not be pinned down to take a definitive stand against genocidal chanting and
All in the
slogans.
context. It's in the context.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
There's this bizarre double standard
Mhm.
that's it kind of defies explanation.
Yeah, it really does. And so I think, you know, for me, the question becomes, or then the question was, um, where's the outrage? I was outraged that the school wasn't more outraged. Like who's who's watching the store? Because that teacher's going in and teaching these kids, and you know, today it's this comment, tomorrow it'll be some other comment. But bigger than that, bigger than the comment was the indifference to the comment.
Yeah.
And
Oh, you know, our friend Mark O'Brien is wrote in the comments. It's interesting how time and energy considerations go out the window if the button pushed is hot enough. So you know, what you're saying is, why aren't we getting outraged over the right things?
right, right. I mean, and as you know, when you made this point early on, we can't get outraged about everything that happens. I mean, I think we have become a hypersensitive society about a lot of things. And if I acted on every time I felt outraged, um, that wouldn't be pretty, but we can't do that. And that's not appropriate either. Right. So how do you determine what's actionable? Like
Yeah.
what deserves your voice? And when I flip that whole thing and said, does this deserve my voice? Does this deserve my voice? Like, do I want my voice on this? And that changed it for me. And the answer was, yeah, this deserves my voice. Because I want to be a person that stands up for that's not okay over there. But that's still, even then, even though I knew that I was doing the right thing, putting someone else at risk was the hard part, the hardest part. Like I put my name on that article, I put it out there, I'll own that. But to put someone else at risk was the really difficult part of this whole thing. And I had many conversations with you, right? And trying to figure out, I want to do the right thing all the way around. I want to do the right thing for me, but I want to do the right thing for the people who are the true victims in this whole thing, right? The people who have been discriminated against, and I'm trying to stand up for them, and yet at the same time, in doing so, that puts them in a place they don't want to be.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of standing up for people who don't want you to stand up for them, it's it's a
They
really
want
strong
to, I
movement.
think people want it, people want you to stand up for like the general,
Yeah.
right? The general population, but not me specifically. Like, don't put my name, don't put my name on there. And that fear is real, and it's
Oh,
just,
yeah.
you know?
I mean, this is a discussion that's been going on in the Jewish community really since after the Holocaust. Um, there's on the one hand this image that really isn't fair, of Jews being led like sheep to the slaughter. Um, it's not like it all happened at once. It happened incrementally.
Mhm.
You start wearing an armband, and then you start being allowed in certain restaurants, and then you stop. You have to live in certain neighborhoods, and it's a form of psychological torture, really, of indoctrinating people into a certain mindset. I mean, negotiators learn these tactics to make the people they're negotiating with more compliant, and eventually you have a population that has been so systematically and incrementally beaten down that they simply can't fathom the idea of resistance. And on the other hand, extreme, you had the people who did resist. You had partisans, you had uprisings within certainly the Warsaw Ghetto, but within some of the camps. And there remains this tension to this day. What is the proper response? To what degree do you say, I have to accept the reality of the situation? Or do you say, I'm not going to let this happen when maybe it's not completely in my control? And you're back to that kind of irreconcilable question. There's just no good answer. But I think the way you framed it is very helpful. Is I have to be true to myself, and I have to be true to the objective reality. And there may be a tremendous conflict between those two.
Mhm.
I still have to make a decision at the end. And, I talk all the time about the evil of binary thinking, but when you get down to it, you have to make a yes or no choice at the end. There may not be a third way.
Yeah, I think, I think the other piece of this is just having that honest conversation, with the other people involved. And um, I am smarter now than I was then about the risks and the fear that, I had no idea that there were Jewish children in our country who go to school and people were using a Sharpie marker to draw swastikas on them. Like, I had no idea. I was like, wait, what? And here? That doesn't happen. That happens. That happened right here in my county in Southwest Florida. Like, I had no idea how many Jewish girls were afraid to wear their Star of David necklace. We were taking that off this year since the whole Kanye West incident. I just didn't, I had no idea. And so I think part of it was, it's my responsibility to educate myself. But once I'm educated, and I mean, I can say, well, how am I supposed to know all this? But once I'm educated and once I know, now it's my responsibility to stand up on the right side of it. And I think for me, when I look back on 2023 and figure out what my lesson of the year was, it is impact versus intent. My intent was so pure, and in my mind, the absolute right thing to do. And yet there were all of these unintended consequences that impacted people who did not deserve it. So I compounded that worry and that tension that was already there, right? By creating kind of this firestorm. Like, did I want to create a firestorm? Of course, that was the whole point. I wanted people to know that this teacher did this thing and it was terrible. And why isn't anybody saying anything? But what I wasn't really paying attention to is that firestorm. There were people in that firestorm that didn't deserve to be there. You know, so my takeaway is, if I had that to do over, how would I have done that differently? You know, would I still write the article? I think so. Would I write it differently? Probably. Would I put my name on it? Absolutely. But I think when we try to stand up for the right thing, it's really important. And there's always a way to stand up for the right thing. I think I am convinced of that. There's always a way. But I think when we decide to do that, it's really, really important. If I'm not the victim in this thing, there's a victim out there. How are my actions going to impact that victim? Because in trying to do the right thing, I can make it really a lot worse for that person. So, you know, and I think this year, that's going to be 2024 is going to be my question. What's the intent? How do I measure the impact against the intent? Because I do want to be a person who stands up for the right thing, like I do, and I think most people do.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But and even then, you know, there may be situations where you have to accept there's going to be a measure of collateral damage. I mean, certainly stories in the headlines right now are all about that. The conflict, the tension between taking necessary action in a way that will inevitably cause undesired consequences. And, you know, if we lived in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to deal with these things, but we don't. Life's messy. And, you know, when we talked about this originally, I referred you to the comments of the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs.
I have several books up here because of that conversation.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, everybody should. He's really one of the most insightful thinkers of our time. He's passed away quite recently. But when he spoke about anti-Semitism, he said it can't be fought by Jews alone because the victim cannot I forget how he phrased it, cannot cure the problem, cannot deal with the perpetrator alone. And so, you know, what I admire about you so much is your unwillingness to make excuses, to pass the buck, to say it's somebody else's problem, even to the point of finding absolutely legitimate reasons not to pursue it, both in terms of causing other people distress, but also, you know, you haven't gotten into, if you cared to, I mean, there are serious repercussions for you. You were deposed.
I was.
And you didn't tell me what your legal bills were, and you don't need to, but I gather they were not insubstantial.
It's not how I wanted to spend that money, that's for sure. And the teacher got free counsel. I just have to throw that.
Yeah, well,
The
there you
union
go.
paid for her attorney, not mine. You know, here again, you know, I look back on this and I just think I am so much smarter now than I was when this all started. Like, I wish I didn't live through it, but I did. And so now here I am. And so I'm smarter because of it. But, you know, the general counsel for the school actually shared with me a speech by Elie Wiesel in 1999 at the White House with Bill Clinton, President Clinton. and he was getting the Medal of Honor or the Medal of Freedom, one of them. And his speech was about indifference and the power of indifference. And one of the pieces of that speech, and if you're like, it is a speech, we must all listen to this speech, because, you know, we can say never again. We can say that, never forget. We can say all those things. But his point is, indifference is a response that only helps the perpetrator. It never helps the victim. And it's a response. So if I know that this thing happened and I'm mad at the school district for being indifferent, or I'm mad at, you know, whoever, if something happens and you think, how can that person not say anything? And I choose not to say anything, then I'm just as indifferent as they are. You know, the outrage in my head doesn't count if I don't communicate it in an appropriate way. And so, you know, I think the question for me going forward is, should I be indifferent? Like, is my indifference contributing to the problem? Or is my indifference, you know, is it worth the indifference to someone else? I don't know that we ever really always know the answer to that in the moment. But I think being mindful and cognizant of the power of indifference, I think that's worth taking a look at every single time.
Yeah. Mariah Edgington comments that education is crucial, pulling someone aside to say that's not okay. You know, you made this point earlier on, and it made me think of a comment you made right when we started, which I wouldn't have brought up otherwise. The first time we met in person. You know, but no, but I think it's an instructive example. You know, we had become very cordial online. We never met in person, and we had a very collegial. And I walked into a room and you saw me, and you did what many people would do in that situation. You jumped up and you gave me a hug. Now, being an Orthodox Jewish man, I typically don't touch women I'm not married to or close relation to. But I understood what your intent was, and I don't expect the world to conform to my sensitivities. There's no reason that everybody in the world needs to know everything that is on my list of undesirable behavior. So you know, I took it in the spirit that you gave it. It was, you know, it was a gesture of warmth and affection and platonic affection. And you know, and then later on, at a different time, I mentioned it to you. And you know, you apologized, which really wasn't even necessary. But it's that willingness to give people grace.
Yeah.
You know,
See, I think this is an excellent example of, you know, that's not okay. What I did was not okay, right? And in the moment, you know it's not okay. I don't know it's not okay. And then, you know, it isn't until later. So I think this is one of those, I think this is a really good example of how do we address the that's not okay situations, right? Sometimes it isn't, that person didn't do anything with malice. And, you know, in as you said, you knew that I was not malintended, you know, toward you. And the way that you handled it made me take a step back and go, oh, I am so sorry. Like, I had no idea. And now I see those embraces and those, you know, those demonstrations of affection much differently now, right? But if you would have handled it in the moment and said, you know, Melissa, that's really not okay. I don't touch women, like, you know, I think my first response would have been like defensive, like, hey, I didn't know, right?
Sure.
And so I think the way you handled it is a really good example of sometimes the way we address things that are not okay, we have a lot of power in how the other person receives it as well. You know?
Yeah, and there's so many applications of this. We get our feelings hurt, sometimes for good reason, sometimes not for such good reasons. And pausing a moment to consider the intent, to consider the context, it allows us to frame our response. The sages actually say, don't try to appease your friend in the time of his anger. Don't try to comfort the mourner when their dead lies before them. Yes. It's like perfectly good, positive, reasonable intentions that, if they are not done in the right time, place, and fashion, are counterproductive. It doesn't mean don't do it. It means they have the sensitivity to know how and when and where.
Yeah, be thoughtful about it.
And that's what makes for a healthy society. Then we can all give each other grace. But at the
Mark,
same
so you
time,
mentioned Mark O'Brien and in the chat there. Mark O'Brien and I had a conversation, it's been a long time now, about he and I disagree on lots of things, but we can have great kinds of conversations because we kind of both approach it with this intellectual humility. Like, tell me what I'm missing. Tell me why I'm wrong. Like, where is my thinking flawed, right? And when you can approach conversations with that, and I'm not always great at it, just so you know, I'm still working on that. But when you can approach conversations, especially hard ones, like, tell me why I'm wrong. Like, what am I missing? That shifts the whole conversation to, I'm open to hearing you, instead of, who do you think you are? And I think we do a lot of this. Like, I'm right, you're wrong. Who do you think you are telling me what to do? Who do you think you are telling me that I'm wrong? And in this particular case, I did think that the teacher was wrong. And
you
I think,
just gave me a thought, if I may, that is our expectation that other people will not respond well encourages us not to speak up.
oh yeah,
In other words, I knew you were going to take this the right way because I knew you well enough. When you're dealing with people who are doing things that are much more egregious, or people you don't know as well, so then it's easier for me to convince myself, I just don't know how this is going to play out. It could be way out of proportion. It's just not worth the risk.
and you use the word encourage people not to speak up, and I might submit justifies why you should not speak up, right? Because we can rationalize, we can give ourselves all kinds of reasons why it's just not worth it. Oh, they're my neighbor, I gotta live next to them, like, that's gonna be awkward. Or it's my Uncle Joe and we're gonna have Thanksgiving and I don't want to start a big thing in the family, right? There are lots of those conversations that are being had, and so we go kind of back to where we were, like, what is worth your voice? What is worth
Even in marriage, even in a relationship, oh, I know if I pick on this little thing, I know it's going to blow up. And then we let these little things build up and build up and build up and stew, and then at some point they explode, and then everything simmers down eventually, and then the pattern starts all over again
right?
because there's not enough trust. There's not enough confidence that we can handle this situation maturely, even after 30 years of marriage.
Yeah, if you think about how many times, and I'm just sitting here thinking, I have said that a million times. It is just not worth it. Like, I'm not even gonna bring that up. It's just not worth it. Like, I'll pick up the socks off the floor myself, right? Or whatever the thing is. But I think when you get into, and especially getting back to the anti-Semitism piece, we are living in dangerous times. I mean, we are living in times where people really are fearful for being Jewish.
Yeah.
And so I think that shifts I think that shifts the level of importance. And when you ask yourself, is it worth it for me to be indifferent? Like, if I'm indifferent in this particular situation, does it make anti-Semitism worse? And I submit that 90% of the time the answer would be yes. Because
Yeah.
any expression of disrespect, disregard, you know, pick a word, contributes
I've always
to the
remembered this from the old Peanuts comic strip. There's one more line that says, "I believe that no problem is so big that you can't run away from it." And, I think there's plenty of that around.
Yeah. There, especially now, I mean, I think there are a lot of people that are like, that problem is so big. What can I do? Like, I can't, no, of course I don't agree with all of that, but what can I do?
Yeah.
And that's what started the pins for me. Like,
Right.
what can I do? What can I do? And I can wear a pin and I can answer what that pin stands for when somebody says, hey, what's up with the pin? Like, and I can tell them. And so that was my small step of agency that I was hanging on to, like, because I was feeling the same way. Like, how can I possibly help?
Yeah. And Mark O'Brien, again, another comedy, says there are times at which we'll stand up for things and bear the wrath of those who won't stand up or are afraid to and don't want to be seen in contrast. There's people will get upset with us because they're really upset with themselves.
Right. Oh,
And if
wow.
I stand up, if you stand up, then what's
You're gonna
my
make me
excuse for
look
not
bad for
standing?
not
Exactly,
standing.
exactly.
Exactly. Yeah,
But
so I mean, who do you want to be? Who do you
yeah,
want to be? I mean, and I think we're all going to be tested in this coming year in a variety of ways. What are your values? What do you stand for? And what is worth your voice?
yeah.
You know?
And always looking for that balance. How do I make, how do I have the impact I want to have in a way that increases the likelihood of success and minimizes the collateral damage?
Mhm.
That's going to take a lot of thought.
Yeah, it is. I I think the other piece that I struggle with is, there's this, I think if truth be told, it's a small number of people with a very loud voice, a very loud megaphone. And then there's this other larger segment of the population who doesn't agree, but they're crazy. They're nuts. I'm not like, and we all have to make our personal safety like number one. And so, if I'm in New York City, walking down the street, I'm going to behave very differently than if I'm sitting in a bistro, in my backyard. But I do think that we have a greater collective voice. I mean, I think if you look around you, there are people who probably really share your values, and maybe you don't have these conversations because that's such a hot button issue. Like, oh, we don't talk politics. We don't talk those issues. Like, and you can distill everything down to politics somehow, right? So then you never have the conversations where if you have the conversations, you might discover, hey, she feels just like I do. And then to Mark's point, instead of that person's making me look bad. It's, oh, I have an ally on my street, like my neighbor's with me, right?
Well, right, and everything's safer in numbers. And when the noisy people create the illusion that they're the majority, then everyone else gets intimidated. For years, I wanted to start my own political party. I want to call them the passionate moderates, because I think that both political parties have been hijacked by the extremes, and I think that socially there's a lot of that going on too. The people who are making the noise are staking out the extreme positions because those two things naturally go together. And then we sort of get pulled. I either have to go this way or I have to go that way because nobody can live in that no man's land of moderation.
Right.
And then the
But
problems keep getting worse.
we create the world we live in.
Mhm.
We create the world we live in by, what we deem acceptable. We create social norms. We create social norms by saying, that's okay. It's okay if you rob a bank, or it's not okay if you rob a bank. Like, we don't do that. So the social norms that we create are created by what we accept to be okay. And like in this case, with the teacher, if no one is standing up saying that's not okay, well then this becomes a social norm. It's okay to make comments like that about the Holocaust because this teacher did it and nothing happened. And that just happens. I mean, so what social norms are we willing to accept? Because that's what they're going to become. If we don't stand up, like I think I posted something on LinkedIn and said, unless, we stand up and do something, nothing will change. And you corrected me and said, no, unless we stand up and do something, things are going to get terribly worse. Like, and so, when you think in those, and I agree with you, when you think in those terms, you think, okay, so what new social norms am I willing to accept? Like, am I willing to accept, white supremacists marching through my neighborhood? Like, that's a social norm. Is that okay? Like, are you willing to accept that? Because we decide whether it becomes a social norm.
Yeah, I saw a poster once that said, no raindrop believes it is responsible for the flood.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's good.
And of course, the difference is raindrops don't have free will, but we do. We can choose
Yeah,
how we're going to act.
we do. And we all have agency.
Yeah.
And we can, like Elie Wiesel said, indifference is indeed a response. And it only benefits the bad guys. So, we
Yeah.
have agency. We can say that's not okay.
Well, one of the things that has struck me most of the many things that Elie Wiesel said, that he talked about I think it was Elie Wiesel, might have been Viktor Frankl, but the people who made it through the concentration camps were the people who found ways of helping others. That gave them the purpose that they needed to make it through an absolutely unbearable situation. And I've heard Simon Sinek say the same thing about when he interviewed the Navy SEALs. Who are the ones that make it through training? The ones when they're cold and tired and wet and exhausted and to push the edge of their rope, they turn to the guy next to him and says, what can I do to help you? It's that sense of responsibility for the society we live in, as you say. And that's why I really wanted us to have this conversation, because you didn't have to do anything that you did. You didn't have to start it. You didn't have to continue it. And I mean, the way you told me the story, you were contemplating situations of protecting someone's privacy by risking, perjury or contempt of court, neither of which, unfortunately, had to happen. But the willingness to think in those terms: what is my obligation to others? What is my obligation to an ideal? How do I balance these competing priorities that just won't reconcile with one another? It's that kind of integrity, self-reflection, courage that we all need to summon up. Because, as you say, these are difficult times and they're going to stay difficult for a while. And if we don't take responsibility, then they will get worse. And we don't want that. Any
No,
final thought?
I appreciate your kind words. I can tell you that, you were a huge source of strength for me, and we had many conversations. And I didn't know what the right thing to do, but in the end, I think what world do I want to live in? What world do I want to live in? Do I want to live in a world where this is okay? And I think I'm lucky because I had people in my network that I could reach out to, like you, right? And I have people way smarter than me in my orbit that I could say, help me think this through. What am I missing? Where is the hole in my logic? Because there were so many things that in my head, it made perfect sense. And I just couldn't understand, why is this not making sense to the rest of the world? Because in my head, it's all making sense. And I think we have to get better at saying to other people, I don't know what to do. And I think it's really hard for grown-ups to say, I don't know what to do. I don't know the right thing here, because we're kind of trained to show the most competent person out there, right? We want to put our best foot forward. We want everyone to think that we're smart and we've got it all together, and but I think we learn the most, or at least in my case this year, I have learned a boatload because I have really smart people around me and because I trusted them and said, I don't know what the right thing is here.
Yeah, I
How,
mean, that's the power of community. And, I've loved for years, I've loved Jim Rohn's quote that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. There are people of quality out there, and if we attach ourselves to them, if we surround ourselves with them, then we have someone to turn to. We don't have to worry about being vulnerable. We don't have to worry about needing help and needing advice, because we're human beings, we do. And
yeah.
as long as we have the right people to help us, um, then the chances of getting through things successfully goes way, way up.
So I work with kids and I tell them there are 5 phrases. If you learn these phrases and learn how to use them frequently and with meaning and with sincerity, you will go wherever you want to go in life. And they are please, thank you, I'm sorry, I can help, and I need help. Those are the 5 phrases that if you can use those with the people around you, then you will surround yourself with people who are also going to be able to use those 5 phrases. And to your point about community, I mean, you can do a lot with great people surrounding you and being able to lift you up. The other thing when you said about help, helping the best thing you can do to stay on track is to help someone. I'm reminded of the recovery programs. The recovery programs all have a service aspect. And
Right.
when you're feeling, part of the beauty of those recovery programs are, if you really want to help yourself, you help someone else. And in
Yeah,
helping someone else, you're really doing it for yourself,
right.
right? It benefits you yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're
So,
all gonna have opportunities to say, I need help.
yeah, I mean, selflessness is selfish, and that's okay.
That's okay.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. Melissa, thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you for your
Yeah,
courage
so
and your inspiration. And look forward
thank you.
to many more conversations.
Likewise.
And for those of you who are watching or listening, we didn't take up a dilemma this time, but we certainly have plenty of dilemmas to talk about. Anytime you have a thought of a topic we could take up on a future program, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com, use the contact information, submit it. If it's compelling, you'll be hearing it here. And as always, until next time, encourage you to continue grappling with the gray.